I get very frustrated if my computer at work is not working properly. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do. It should just be working.
That's right.
When I come and I log in, it should just be working. Or if my cell phone fritzes out, I don't know what's happening. I get so frustrated. What would happen to us if our lights didn't turn on?
Right.
Right? If our electricity and power did not work, I mean, that, so thinking about, well, how do we protect that?
Yes.
How be thinking in advance. How do we protect that? What can I do? What role can I play in managing that and helping to make that stronger in the future?
Welcome to Lightbulb Moments, a video podcast series brought to you by Mitsubishi Power, bringing you the brightest minds, most engaging stories, and illuminating points of view from across the energy transition. I'm your host, Erin Bordelon. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Nicole Bateman. She's the President of Economic Development for Decatur and Macon counties in Illinois. Nicole, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start off, tell me a little bit about what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Great. So in my role as the Economic Development President, really at the end of the day, it's about bringing jobs to the community, helping businesses to grow. But behind that, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And so not only attracting companies to our community, but really taking a look at the resources we have, whether that be natural, whether that be up and coming other industries that are interested in Decatur, and matching all of that up to really help companies succeed here.
A big jigsaw puzzle.
It's a big jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes I'm playing putting a puzzle together while we're playing chess. And I've got a game of checkers going over here.
And you have no reference picture, right?
No.
Just see how it works together.
Exactly.
So part of that puzzle piece, I'm assuming, is the energy transition. I know it's a big topic for communities everywhere across the United States and the Americas generally. So tell me a little bit about how economic development plays into energy transition and some of the patterns you're seeing.
Absolutely. So, energy is at the core of every business decision to either locate or expand in Decatur. That is really an essential part. And so being really mindful of where companies want to go next, right? So are they trying to get to net zero? Are they trying to make fast progress? Or are they going to transition slowly? What does that look like? And so in my role as an economic developer, it's really about knowing what other projects are available and potentially out there and quietly matching them up in the background, right? So a lot of what we work on is highly confidential, right?
Yeah.
So we have a lot of company conversations about, we'd like to do this. We're not sure if we can do that here. And I said, well, wait a minute. We're talking to this company over here who has some interest because of this over here. How do we pull all that together so that everybody can meet their goals and can align? And sometimes those conversations take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to come to fruition. Sometimes it's a conversation and nothing comes of it, right? But a lot of it is just knowing what's happening in the atmosphere. We do get a lot of requests. We're really fortunate to have a great industrial infrastructure here that is now taking off into some new direction as it pertains to energy transition. And so that is opening up a lot of possibilities for our community that we haven't necessarily seen in the past.
That's amazing. So yeah, that is one of the reasons, we're talking to you today and found your story so compelling, is that Decatur is, in many ways, it's small town America, but that encapsulates and is representative of the vast majority of, energy transition, right? I think we have this idea that it immediately happens on this large macro scale, when in reality, it starts in places like this. So you mentioned the infrastructure and the industry that exists here already is in a great place to build and develop for energy transition. What other qualities makes Decatur a good fit for this type of thing?
We're really fortunate that ADM has taken on the carbon capture and sequestration model, and that has been a really, really important next step for our community to then transition into the clean energy world, right? So they are having innovative companies like ADM and others here that are really at the forefront of technology much before our daily households will ever hear about it is really important. And that has been key to really putting Decatur on the map for some new technologies that can utilize the carbon sequestration. Now, we did not create the geology in which we sit upon, but it's here, right? So let's use it to benefit, at the end of the day, companies that create jobs, that bring money to households, that create a better quality of life.
Because that's really at the foundation of any energy transition conversation, right? Yes, we want to decarbonize, we want to move towards net zero, we want to do what we can. We have to do it in an equitable, realistic way that sustains the standard of living that people are accustomed to. And that's always kind of that give and pull, I think.
It is. And I think at the beginning of this entire transition, sometimes it's hard for us to communicate or relay why this is important in the long term, right? And especially when we talk about being equitable about it, there's a lot of folks that are worrying about how they're going to pay their power bill next month. So thinking about, okay, we're capturing and sequestering carbon, and how does that impact them, right? So it's like, I think really looking at the communication strategy around all of this and around the whole ecosystem in general is going to be really important for adopting and continuing to get buy-in and moving things forward.
Absolutely. Because ultimately, it is the off-taker, right, that we have in mind. But even just the past few hours and past day or so that I've spent here, I'm reminded that your average off-taker is not like plugged into the energy transition, right, in the way that those of us in the industry are. Your average off-taker is worried about the price of their power bill, right, as I am, as a citizen. We are worried about the lights being on. We're worried about our AC running. These comforts that we've grown accustomed to. So what are some of the challenges that you see between, meeting the needs of the market and also meeting the needs of the off-taker?
So for off-takers, it's going to be really important to have that certainty, right? The certainty of demand. But then when you think about, getting people to change habits, lifestyle changes, adopting new technologies, sometimes those timelines do not mesh together, right? So that's going to be the trick. And I think oftentimes, those that are pick an industry. It's not necessarily just, just in the energy industry, but I think particularly because everybody consumes energy, so we can relate to that. But I think oftentimes at the end of the day, it feels like the light switch is going off, where maybe it should really be a dimmer, or it should be a dimmer switch, right? Like, how do we do this over time that still meets all the needs, satisfies everybody, and move together towards a cleaner future? Because sometimes that adaptation of it can be hard, not just for the end consumer, but also for companies, right? And how do they transition to what they're doing, even if it's consumer driven, to still make sense financially for their industry? It's a lot to balance. I think we're getting better at it. The other challenge too is that technology these days is advancing so rapidly that by the time we settle on a model that will work, the technology's already changed. Or policies and procedures to be able to deploy that technology, it takes so long that it almost hinders the progress, if you will. So I know the word ecosystem is really big right now. It feels like a buzzword, but in the true sense of an ecosystem, marrying all of that together so that we can meet our goals is going to be really important.
And ADM is a good example of that. There's in real time, there are changes and implementations of policy structure on the federal level that's going to impact this project, but if you want this project to be done, you've got to work on it right now before you have all the answers. And I think that's emblematic of a lot of, as you're pointing to, a lot of the issues that developers have with, energy transition. Infrastructure is not built overnight. It's a long process. You've got to get the permitting done. You've got to do your applications, all of that stuff. And you have to do it, as far as what I'm seeing, oftentimes without the full answers ahead.
Right. And that's a risk, right? And much of my job is removing the risk so that companies will commit. So that's where those offtake agreements are essential, especially in the energy space. I mean, these projects will never advance without those offtake agreements.
And being a little bit courageous in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's hard for companies to be the first, right? They take the biggest risk, but they can also get the biggest reward. So it is admirable what our innovative companies are doing these days, because as an individual, putting it all on the line for something is tough,
it's hard,
right? It's hard to do. But there are very, very bright minds behind all of this that I think are really not only advancing the industry, but really going to bring together a new life for all of us that we probably didn't even know was possible.
So what are some of those risks that you're seeing? How do you mitigate them in your communication strategies? Take me there.
Yeah, so some of the risks that we see, right, it's the predictability. So energy, right? So from outside the energy world, it's companies coming to us and saying, how much clean energy can we get? What's the reliability of the energy, the cost? And then, of course, workforce, water, sewer, right? Some of the not super sexy things, but all of those things that are going to be really essential to making those companies succeed here in Decatur, Illinois.
I want to backpedal just a minute, and you had mentioned ADM, and can you walk me through, I know some of this is proprietary, but walk me through that project generally.
Sure.
And how that came to be, especially the carbon capture element with the natural geology we have here.
So about 10 years ago, ADM and the University of Illinois and other partners came together to start researching and figuring out how do we capture carbon and safely store it? And then how much can we scale that? What does that look like? So they've been doing this for over a decade now, successfully and safely. And so it's just part of that process of proving the technology. Once the technology is proven, then you can take it to market, right? And so then now that's why we're seeing opportunities like this with the Broadwing Energy Complex and other companies that are interested in engaging with the area because of this new proven technology that we have and sit on today.
One thing I wanted to ask you today is when we communicate on energy transition and how we're developing these projects, how do we best preserve quality of life throughout the energy transition? What are the ultimate goals and takeaways?
So I think, as we look at it from a community perspective, being conscious of the impact on the community, right? But also communicating the benefits to what's going to take place in the community because of these specific projects. Jobs, right? Higher paying jobs, opportunities for more technical skills. There's a whole bundle. And what happens then is once we have more jobs, retail follows households. At the end of the day, I would say generally the general public will not be satisfied with our level of success in the community until they get that one restaurant that they really want. So thinking about, kind of that ripple effect of what that looks like. But from the energy standpoint too, communicating that, I think in messaging in such a way that, okay, at the end of the day, maybe not tomorrow, likely not tomorrow, 10 years from now, this is what this means for you as a power payer, right? If we want our electricity to turn on every day, this is what we're going to need to do. Here's the improvements that need to be made. And really, I think articulating that path forward in a meaningful way that that somebody can relate to, that they're experiencing in their everyday lives. Because a lot of these projects that I work on, whether that be in the energy space, the fermentation space, bioprocessing, EV, whatever it might be, are so technical and big and innovative that the thought of it is just overwhelming. It certainly can be. And so really finding a way to break that down and just communicating what small part everybody can do in their daily lives to make a difference toward a cleaner future is going to be really key, I think, to then, kind of building those blocks and stacking those wins and communicating that progress to all get us to where we want to be.
That's absolutely been my experience as a quote unquote outsider, right? Coming into the energy sector is on the outside from my day-to-day life, energy space felt very esoteric, right? It felt very, that's not my problem. Again, and part of the difficulty is that the issues that the energy sector is facing are on a massive scale, right? It's like looking at the Grand Canyon. It's like, okay, I see it, but I don't really understand the depth and breadth of what I'm looking at. And it's the same thing in the energy space, right? And I always say the energy sector thinks in decades, whereas the rest of us are just trying to make it day by day, paycheck to paycheck, right? These very like incremental units of time. So I know a big part of my job is balancing these long-term, large, see the benefits down the line issues and communicating them in real time, right? And communicating the importance of paying attention to it, caring about it, acting in certain ways to make these effects in real time. And that bridging that gap is my whole job.
Yes. And that is a challenge because I find with most new technologies, if you get the early adapters to come on board and their experience didn't match your expectation, you lose them, right?
Yes.
They kind of go off that cliff, and then you've got to work just as hard to get them back. And that's just for the early adopters. Those are the people that want to give it a try.
Right.
We see that across a lot of different industries. But I think, so there's that part. And I think there's also what I've noticed again, and across several industries is the scientists are brilliant. They're not great marketers, right? Yeah. And it's like the science gets to the market first before we get a chance to market it and brand it and communicate it in such a way that I think would help with the adoption of the new technology. And so I think we need to do a more thoughtful job of that. I think would be very helpful in getting adopters.
Well, and a big buzzword I know is collaboration, right?
Yes.
But it's often talked about in other terms, whereas collaboration to me, that's what I think about, right? Mm-hmm. I think about me and people like you talking to these brilliant people and taking all that information and then distilling it to its most important parts to communicate back, right? Great, here's what this means, or here's what this is, here's what it means for you, here's why it should care, or why you should care.
Yes, exactly. That is key, right? Because at the end of the day, in any project or any initiative or new technology, you're going to have a lot of different feelings.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, everybody is human. Everybody's going to feel one way about something, right? So having that collaboration ahead of time so that the messaging is going to resonate so that you can get the buy-in and you can get things moving faster is key. It's important. To me, most of life comes down to communication.
Yeah.
And, that I think sometimes it's taken for granted when we talk about working on new projects or new technology and innovation. When the communication is lacking, you're going to get off to a really rocky start.
And like you're saying, you work across different sectors every day and pretty interchangeably, but all of them rely on a secure and reliable grid.
Yes.
And if you do not have a secure and reliable power grid, nothing else can operate the way that we just take for granted. We assume it's going to operate, right? Mm-hmm. We assume that when we walk into a building and turn the lights on, that the lights are going to turn on, right? Exactly. And if that goes away, a lot of other things crumble.
Agreed. And so think about, I get very frustrated if my computer at work is not working properly. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do. It should just be working.
That's right.
When I come and I log in, it should just be working. Or if my cell phone fritzes out, I don't know what's happened. I get so frustrated. Yes. What would happen to us if our lights didn't turn on?
Right.
Right? If our electricity and power did not work. I mean, so thinking about, well, how do we protect that?
Yes.
Be thinking in advance. How do we protect that? What can I do? What role can I play in managing that and helping to make that stronger in the future? But as you said, we got to think in decades about that, not day to day. And that's foreign to a lot of industries, frankly. Mm-hmm. They can be somewhat proactive, but a lot of them are very reactive to consumer demands and what's happening, but they can also turn quickly. That can't happen necessarily in the energy industry. And so I think maybe being mindful of that, and giving the industry some grace and saying, hey, listen, we are trying to figure this out as quickly as we can, but we got to consider all of these other things too, I think is a big part, and just that communication message and moving forward too.
And that's exactly where we're at right now with the generative AI, as being kind of an arms race in the energy sector. I keep saying power producers, OEMs, right? We are used to our typical customer being, your local utility, right? Your power producer, people who are also in the industry understand what we need to do, the hoops we need to jump through, the time it's going to take to make these things happen safely and reliably. And we are now having to collaborate with, data centers who they're all about speed. Talk about being reactive to a market. They don't understand. I'm speaking generally here, but
yes. No, I know
but
what you're saying.
there's frustration on that side. And why is this going to take 5 years? Why are you telling me this is going to take 5 to 10 years? And so again, communicating those reasons and communicating, look, this is our typical demand is here, and you're forecasting in some spaces like literally unbelievable numbers, right?
Yes.
Like people, professionals in the industry are saying that can't be right, right? Has someone checked the math on this? Because the scale that we have is just incredible. It's not, we haven't seen it before.
It is. And, we're at a time, I think, in our country and in our world, but, every few decades we go through this transition where an industry is transforming, right? And it's going to move us and set us up for the next 50, 60, 100 years.
Yes.
That's different today. Yeah. We're setting ourselves up for the next 5 years, the next 10 years, because the technology is moving so rapidly and the demands coming from, this world that is really coming about that we didn't even know existed in our childhood. Right. I mean, think how much has changed since then.
Right.
And so as energy providers in producing that product, it's an enormous demand, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. But you're right, it's that communication with those companies like the data centers to say, okay, we can get you this at this time. Let us work with you on a transition plan till we get there, right? Again, that transition is a big deal, and it's an important part. And not only in just transforming, but transitioning too is two key pieces.
All right. So one thing I wanted to ask you is, what do you wish people asked you? What do you wish people knew about your corner of the energy transition and what you're seeing and doing in this larger space?
I think that's a great question because we see in our roles as economic developers, we see the interest before anybody else will know that companies or technologies, innovations are interested in your community. And so understanding that, while you may not see things happening yet, that things are happening. And sometimes they are really big things that we cannot talk about. Right. There's a lot of things that need to come together before we're able to share that with others. So I think just, maybe trusting the vision that your economic developers have and the partners that are at the table with them to be in the driver's seat for developing your community is important. And of course, any bright ideas are always welcome. But I do think that there's a lot going on in the background that's pretty exciting for the community if they only knew, but we can't tell them. So that's a big part of it.
Okay, so in your day-to-day work, you interact with a lot of businesses and companies, and every now and then you've got someone brave enough, bold enough to be that first mover and break the tape or break ground on a new project or a new strategy. And so tell me a little bit about the importance of actions like this in what you're seeing and how that can propel us through the energy transition.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked, because from my role, having companies that want to come in and be the first in our community, not only is it a real morale booster, but from an industry perspective, that's important because it really sets the pace, and it also inspires other companies to really take that leap too, right? It's hard being the leader. It's hard being the first. You take all the risk, you get all the blame. Yeah. It is not easy, but we're super thankful for ADM and for Warwick really coming together, collaborating, communicating, working with our partners within the community to bring this project about. It takes a lot of bold, bright, innovative people that are willing to spend their careers to do something big for the globe. And we're just really grateful for all of those that are contributing and participating in this space.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to piggyback off of that and thank you for being one of those bold, bright people that lead us through these difficult transitions. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been wonderful.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Lightbulb Moments, brought to you by Mitsubishi Power. Keep the conversation going by following us on LinkedIn, and we'll include all relevant materials and resources in our show notes. See you next time.